Hello again. I thought I'd like to make a video where I can kind of introduce myself and talk a little bit more about who I am. So maybe you can kind of understand where I'm coming from when I tell the stories I intend to tell. I've also got this kind of recurring problem where I do tend to be judged a little bit by how I look and not necessarily who I am. So I'd kind of like to get it out. And also, never was that kind of problem more pronounced than when I was living in Japan. You'll probably see what I mean as I go in more detail. Also, I'd like to give some shout outs to other channels on YouTube. People who've kind of inspired me to be more productive and kind of, get my voice heard in my own kind of way. So first, if you'll kind of bear with me, I'll begin in Japanese, then I'll kind of wrap around in English. はい、挨拶です。私はショーンと申します。よろしくお願いします。私は23歳ぐらいの時に日本人の彼女がいて、日本人の友達もいて、だからその時に私は急に日本に興味を持つようになった。その頃私、スペイン語と日本語を同時に勉強していたんだけど、やはりカリフォルニア州にはスペイン語と英語のバイリンガルがものすごくたくさんいますので、私はどんなに上手になっても、まあ、そのバイリンガルに対して、仕事の面接に私には勝ち目はないと思って、だからちょっとスペイン語を捨てて、日本語を勉強することにしました。そういうわけで、私はハワイ大学に日本語を勉強しに行って、それは2007年に卒業しました。卒業したらすぐに日本に英語を教えに行きました。私は5年間東京に住んでいて、結構有名な英会話で働き始めた。その5年間の間に私は本当に日本のいいところと日本の悪いところをいっぱい経験しましたと思います。あ日本は日本はとっても綺麗だと思う。とっても綺麗。それは日本の大自然だけじゃなくて、日本の大都市、東京とか、横浜とか、大阪もとっても綺麗だと思いました。例えば道にゴミを投げ捨てる人はあんまり見えないって感じだった。私は本当に日本人の環境を大事にすることにとってとても感心しました。それに日本の歴史も面白いし、日本のテレビゲーム、漫画、アニメも楽しいし、日本の女性も美しいし、あと正直言ったら日本食はそんなに口に合わなかったけど、とにかくヘルシーだし、私には日本の好きなところは多いです。なのにその5年間が終わったら私は日本にもう二度と来なかったら構わないって感じだった。後に私はいつか他の動画を作ってもっと詳しく説明するつもりなんだけど、今簡単に言うと日本に住むストレスがだんだん溜まって結局我慢ができなくなってきた。そんで去年2012年アメリカに帰って私言語を教えることが好きになってきたことで自分の英会話と、初級レベルの日本会話を作りました。ではそれは今までのストーリーです。よろしくお願いします。Okay, so let me just repeat everything I just said one more time in English. Thanks for bearing with me. So my name's Sean. Nice to meet you. When I was about 23, I had a Japanese girlfriend, and I was in a band with this other guy who was Japanese. So kind of around that time, I got really interested in the culture of Japan. And I was studying Spanish and Japanese at the same time, but in California, there are just millions and millions of Spanish bilinguals. So I thought if I really continued that, I really couldn't make a job out of it, or I couldn't kind of do anything with it. But on the other hand, an American who speaks Japanese is kind of much more rare, so I thought maybe I could kind of use that to get a job somewhere. And also, I basically just loved, studying foreign languages. So, following through with that, I went off to University of Hawaii, to study Japanese, and I graduated in 2007. And after graduating there, I immediately went to Japan to begin teaching English. So for about the next 5 years, from 2007 to last year, I was living in Tokyo and working in a pretty famous, pretty well-known English conversation school. And throughout those 5 years, I think I really got to know the good side and the bad side of Japan. First of all, I would say that Japan is really beautiful. It's a really beautiful place, and I don't just mean the nature, which of course it has, but even the big cities. If you've never been to Tokyo, it's surprisingly immaculate in some places. The biggest city in the world, and you just don't see people throwing trash on the ground. So it's pretty amazing. I was pretty impressed. I was very much impressed, actually, with just the way that Japanese have this kind of commitment to keep the environment clean. Japanese history is really interesting. Video games, manga, anime, that's all a lot of fun if you're into that kind of thing. Japanese women, don't even get me started. Honestly speaking, I'm not really a big fan of Japanese food. It surprises a lot of my Japanese friends when I say I don't like sushi. But at least I could say it's a lot more healthy than American food. So on the whole, there's many, many reasons for me to love Japan. But even though I say that, when those 5 years were over, I felt like I wouldn't care if I never set foot again in Japan. And again, I'll make another video that kind of explains in further detail in the future. But just for right now, it was really stressful living in Japan, especially for 5 years. And I was kind of missing coming back to American life. That's the kind of thing that's really easy to say. But I don't know how you, the viewer, would kind of take that. 5 years, you could say it's a short time, or you could say it's a very long time. It's half a decade, so it is fairly long, and it can leave a really big impact on you. And I think it did on me. So that's just kind of how I felt at the time. So last year, 2012, I came back to America, and in those 5 years, I really developed this love for teaching, especially for teaching languages. So I decided to open up my own English and kind of basic level Japanese school. So while there's a lot more to the story than that, that's basically where I'm in my life right now, and that's kind of the backdrop against what I'm going to kind of frame the things that I do with this channel. One other quick thing I'd like to say is, if you do have the experience of living outside your country for a few years, maybe like 5 years or so, when you come back, you do get really shocked at what's changed. At least that's how it was in my case. 5 years away, then coming back, I felt America really, really changed a lot. So again, I'll talk about that later, but the next thing I wanted to do, I wanted to give some shout-outs to different channels who are on YouTube that kind of, inspired me to kind of start writing and start sharing ideas. The first I want to start off with is Thunderfoot. Thunderfoot, he might be considered something of kind of like a polarizing figure. I've seen people who just make videos on how much they hate the guy. But for me personally, I think he's brilliant, and I think he's doing really fantastic work. For me, what he especially kind of got through to me was this idea of kind of using the internet, and YouTube in particular, as kind of like an open marketplace of ideas. for me, it was very inspirational how, if you really follow his channel, what he did, he really did make some sacrifices, and he really did take a stand on certain issues, like free speech, atheism, and anti-intellectualism. I think that he, like myself, doesn't really like to fit kind of into a convenient ism, per se. Of course, he's famous as an atheist, but I think even he thinks that that's kind of the wrong focus. The main point of his thinking and the main point of, maybe how he perceives himself, while of course atheist is how he's kind of labeled, that's not really the point. It's not that he has this strong opposition to, God and like religions in general, but it's more that he has a strong belief in physical evidence and reason logic, especially, as a way to kind of progress the knowledge, progress the capability of mankind, and how he actually champions the cause of education, and constantly kind of pushing, intellectual frontiers, as that's, probably the most useful way to spend your life. I think it just so happens that there's many people who their prime motivation in life is religious, and that kind of interferes with this idea of physical evidence, and reason logic, because by definition, it's concerned with the supernatural, the unprovable. So on those kind of points, I couldn't agree with him more. I think I do understand why some people don't like him, especially the Muslim community. Being a person who has, Muslim friends, I could see why many of them take what he says very personally, because he seems to mean them very personally. But again, for me, the real beauty of his channel is, more his passion about education and free speech. And I think that no matter what side of the aisle you stand on him personally, I don't think anyone will dispute that he's a capable and he's a knowledgeable man of science. Another channel which has brought me just great joy over the past few years has been Noah Antweiler, aka the Spoony One. I enjoy most all of his videos, which, if you don't know, they're basically just reviews of just nerdy things like video games, movies, TV shows. Some of his highlights include, his mad ranting on Final Fantasy, and a very long and ultimately very personal review of the Ultima series of video games. As I said, I've enjoyed all this and more, but the series which will probably most directly influence this channel is a series called Counter Monkey, wherein he talks generally off the cuff about just different aspects of Dungeons and Dragons and role-playing gaming in general. What I've noticed, and what I think that he's noticed, is over the course of doing those videos, the most enjoyable videos, and the ones that seem to strike a chord more with the fans, are ones that are based on real stories. Just actual things that happen, just funny ways in which something went absolutely wrong, or, interactions between people that kind of played out in a funny way. If I make a comparison to myself, in my personal experience, which is teaching in a foreign country, I'm absolutely loaded to bear with, stories of when things went wrong, and, just any number of things kind of played out in a funny way that you wouldn't expect living in a different country. And it's also my belief that anyone who's, that I'm not the only one who's experienced something like this. I think anybody who's taught English in Japan kind of knows exactly what I'm talking about. So, Noah Antweiler, he's a really great storyteller. And I'm hoping that I can also, kind of use my platform to kind of share some kind of funny stories, maybe get some catharsis, Another channel I'd like to mention, and honestly, I've only discovered her in the past few months or so, is Karen Strawn, aka Girl Writes What. So, if you don't know, she's a woman who surprisingly is a men's rights activist. And she speaks about issues that have mostly to do with gender and society. Tackling things like modern-day feminists, inequities in society between men and women, and also, like Thunderfoot, atheism. She writes very well and very concisely, and I feel like I learn something new with every video that she makes. And it's my hope if I could do anything similar to that, I'd be very satisfied. One incident that she weighed in on was there was a famous confrontation earlier this year between the MRA and a group of angry feminists. And I think a lot of us who saw the videos about it, the image that's probably most probably left in your brain is this woman that we kind of refer to as Big Red, just yelling, fuck face, and just, cussing in front of people's faces. Now, being a complete non-expert in gender relations, I want to put forth something I remember discussing in a university class of mine. And that's that one general difference in communication between men and women is that men tend towards the logical and the rational, whereas women tend toward the emotional and would often prefer intuition to cold logic. Now, I know, of course, that's to say that, the whole of men and women can be summed up in this kind of A or B model is ridiculous, but in a general way, I feel like there's truth to it. And in a specific way, I think that's the case in this situation. That group of feminists was clearly charged with emotion and just acting out of anger. And no amount of reasoned talk was going to work with them in that situation. Now, I'm not saying that emotions are bad. In fact, I believe quite the opposite. But when it comes to getting through to a largely male group, if you can't appeal to reason, you're probably not going to get anywhere. And I think that's why Karen shines. So if you think it's just the novelty of a woman who speaks out on men's issues is kind of all she has going for her, that fades very quickly when she just makes interesting point after interesting point. And she proves over and over again that she's got an excellent head on her shoulders, and she really knows how to craft an argument and an idea. I think that she shares a similar philosophy with Thunderfoot in that she reads her writings in a very calm, logical manner, and she lets the arguments and her thoughts kind of speak for themselves, instead of relying on kind of quick editing or, unnecessary exaggeration to kind of inject this kind of false urgency into what she's saying. She just tells the issues as they are, and it's very thought-provoking. Her videos are well worth the watch. And finally, the dark horse on my list is a guy named with the channel Unplayed a Thing. Does long plays of generally very obscure video games, most of which I've never even heard of until he actually presents them. Directly as a result of watching his playthroughs of Fist of the North Star, or in Japanese, Hokuto no Ken, I became a huge fan of everything from the manga to the movies, the TV series, which going through them really helped me with my Japanese speaking. Listening to him as he kind of does his thing and plays video games, often just getting completely lost in a dungeon, getting spanked by a boss, or even just listening to him kind of goof around and make this kind of really mellow stoner commentary, you get the feeling that he's a pretty cool guy. I think most of us who kind of browse channels here on YouTube, eventually you find someone who either reminds you of a friend you already have, or gives you the feeling that you would probably be good friends with them if you ever met them face to face. So for me, he's definitely that kind of guy, and he's the kind of guy who you can just kind of turn on one of his videos and just kind of relax, goof off, and have fun. So in a nutshell, if I can take all those elements of those channels, rationality, education, good storytelling, exploring kind of new or thought-provoking ideas, Taking that and kind of covering it in this kind of chocolate-coated goofiness. If I can kind of run the gamut from the important and profound to the inane and the comically unimportant, then I'll feel like my channel is kind of being a success. So once again, I wanted to say thanks for watching. 見てくれてありがとうございます。はい、挨拶です。私はショーンと申します。